The format of tonight will be as follows. First of all, we'll have a short talk by Shaykh Arif Abdulhussain, followed by a talk by Shaykh Abu Jaffar, and followed that by Shaykh Ali Raza Bojani. We will then take questions from the audience and also via Facebook and Twitter for our online audience. So to begin with some brief introduction. First of all, Shaykh Arif, he founded the Al-Mahdi Institute in 1993 and serves as its director and senior lecturer. He's been at the forefront of developing and delivering advanced Islamic studies tailored toward training students capable of addressing the needs of contemporary societies. He's a renowned international and thought-provoking inspirational speaker with a dedication to encouraging the development of indigenous expressions of Islam throughout the world. Shaykh was educated at the Madrasa Sayyid Al-Khuy in London, where he also taught numerous disciplines, and he went on to study at Hawza Al-Miya of Qom and continued private training and research with leading scholars in Qom. Our second guest speaker today, Shaykh Abu Jaffar, he studied in Zanzibar in the colleges under the auspices of Al-Azhar Institute. He was a Muballigh in Dar es Salaam with Maulana Marhum Sayyid Akhtar Rizvi in the Bilal Muslim Mission. He then studied in Qom for 10 years under the Center for the International Center for Islamic Studies under various ulama including Allama Jaffar al-Hadi, Allama Sayyid Kamil Haydari, and Ayatollah Muhammad Sadiq Tahrani. He was taught by Ayatollah Jawad Amili at Masjid Azam, and he was previously a Sunni Muslim from the Imam Shafi Madhab, Shia Islam, after seeing a dream in the late 70s with the assistance of Maulana Jaffar Abbas. Our third speaker, Shaykh Ali Raza Bojani, is a postdoctoral fellow at the Al-Mahdi Institute. He holds a PhD from Durham University in Islamic legal theory. His doctoral work forms the basis of a recently published book, Moral Rationalism and Sharia, Independent Rationality in Modern Shia Usul al-Fiqh. Ali Raza is a graduate of the Al-Mahdi Institute 4-year Hawza program, and he has continued Islamic studies through sabbaticals at the seminaries of Qom and Mashhad. He is also a practicing optometrist, and furthermore, he serves as a member of the Al-Mahdi Institute Research and Education Board and is an elected member of the British Association of Islamic Studies and a member of the Durham Law School's Islamic Law and Modernity Ilm Research Cluster. So without further ado, I will hand over first of all to Shaykh Arif for a short talk.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin wa ashabihi al-muntajabin wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsan ila qiyam yawmiddin. Amma ba'd, assalamu alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Azadari. Aza obviously means grief. Azadar is the one who upholds grief, and azadari is a name given to the whole process of upholding grief or the whole culture in which Imam Hussein is remembered and mourned. Now this culture of remembrance of Al-Hussein and offering a show of support has its basis in the human intellect and human emotion. As far as the intellect is concerned, it is to do with the recognition of the reason for which Hussein ibn Ali made a stand and a stance on the plains of Karbala, refusing to pay allegiance to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, whose allegiance would lead to the allegiance of Yazid and to legitimize the role of Yazid as the Khalifa. And of course, his statement was that if Islam is plagued by the likes of Yazid, then I bid my farewell upon Islam. And his statement that, O people, I do not come out in revolt through any gain or causing dissent within the Ummah or seeking mischief. My sole aim is to bring about reform, to ordain good, prohibit evil, and bring about the rectification of the Ummah of my grandfather, the Prophet, and my father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, because the Prophet's statement was that me and Ali are the two fathers of this Ummah, and hence that as a point of reference, Imam Hussein uttered those words. And of course, his other statement that, O people, the Prophet has said that he who sees an individual making halal what the Prophet has made haram, and making haram what the Prophet has made halal. And if that individual is not opposed, then it is the right of Allah to cast such an individual who gives tacit approval into the fire with the oppressive ruler who is going against the commands of Allah. The emotional basis stems from the Quran again, in which the Prophet says, in which the Prophet is told to say, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. I do not ask for any reward in place of the Sharia that I've conveyed to you. Sharia not meaning the law of Islam, but means the whole teachings of Islam. إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى, save for intense love within the qurba. So the emotional aspect of azadari stems from this aspect of mawadda. So we've got two things. Azadari is a composition of a deep understanding of the message of Hussein ibn Ali on the one hand, which is the intellectual appreciation of it, and on the other hand, it is an expression of the deep-seated love for Hussein ibn Ali, which again is based upon the text of the Quran. Now, innovation, the different forms azadari has taken. What is innovation? Of course, I will not go through the technical debates here, but looking at the Quran, the prophetic traditions, innovation is not the introduction of a new practice within religion. Not at all. The Quran condones the Christians for innovating certain devotional practices. Innovation, most particularly, is a term given to a practice that acquires a particular status within Sharia and in itself is counterproductive or regressive. That's when it's known as innovation. Otherwise, the primary injunction of the Quran is, as we understand, ibaha, the permissibility to concoct different ways and express different types of sentiments to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through different practices. So in principle, azadari is not at all in conflict with any of the precepts of Islam. The third point is that azadari was institutionalized by the imams themselves and highly encouraged by the imams. When we say, well, how can azadari be encouraged? Well, in this way, in the very simplistic way that the imams would say, remember Al-Hussein, shed tears for him, there is a lot of reward in that for you. We speculate at the rational level that the imams did this in order to keep the basis for which Imam Hussein gave his life alive in the minds of the people, especially in the era of Bani Umayyah. And as we know historically that it was after the death of Hussein ibn Ali that there were multiple uprisings of the Tawabin, of the Medina, of the Medinian community, of the Meccan community, of Mukhtar and of Bani Abbas, all under the banner of Hussein ibn Ali's brutal murder at Karbala, which eventually toppled the Bani Umayyah, and the Bani Abbas took over. So it was serving a huge political objective and an objective of reformation. Having looked at all of this, now we ask, what is the function of azadari therefore? Based on azadari being composed of one, an intellectual aspect or the rational and emotional, azadari in the modern day acquires twofold expression. One is an expression of conveying the sentiments of Hussein ibn Ali and whatever Hussein ibn Ali stood for. And the other one is a show of personal devotion to Hussein ibn Ali in line with the ayat of Mawadda. Now there's a distinction here, and it needs to be made very clear that there is a public aspect of azadari and there is a private aspect of azadari. The public aspect is to convey the message of Hussein ibn Ali to the onlooker, to the one unacquainted with Hussein ibn Ali. Here immediately we understand that the message has to be conveyed only in a way that is conducive to the listener and to the onlooker in accordance with their environment, in accordance with their own context. And therefore that aspect of azadari has to be understood by its own merit. It will be dictated by its own terms. So, in a community like India, maybe they acquire the forms that are more conducive to the Indian mentality. Within the UK, in the public, when azadari is performed, it has to be in accordance with what is conducive for this environment. The personal aspect of azadari means self to devote, to show devotion to Hussein ibn Ali in a variety of manner. Not devotion to Hussein ibn Ali, devotion to Allah, but expression of love for Hussein ibn Ali. Now that has taken off on many, many forms. Beating of the chests, cutting of self, striking swords upon the forehead. If these forms are performed in public, they would hardly express the sentiment of Hussein ibn Ali. They would be counterproductive. And since they are counterproductive and not conducive, it is defeating. And at that point, it becomes something that is frowned upon altogether in the context of azadari itself. So here we come to this notion of private space and public space. In the public space, azadari must only be in a form that is conducive to the environment in which it is performed. So, beating of blades, cutting of heads, so on and so forth, is not something that is conducive. It is not right. Or taking of horses and kissing horses and passing under horses. These are all rich symbolism, and by the primary law of the Quran, they can be justified. By the theology of Islam, they probably can be justified. But they are not conducive and they're giving a wrong message. So these things in the public space should be avoided. Now if somebody says, well, what about Pakistan and India, if not in the UK? Then the question is that right now, through media and technology, there is no public space that is relativistic. It is confined to one country as opposed to another country. Public space has become global public space. So it should acquire a very universal standard that in the public space, azadari must avoid symbolism that are giving wrong impression of the sacrifice of Hussein ibn Ali. And in addition, they should acquire a form that is conducive to the environment at hand. So in Africa, it's probably not conducive to go and give literature out in villages, but maybe in the name of Imam Hussein to give water, for example, or to donate blood. And maybe in the UK, a most conducive form of azadari would be in distribution of literature or having interfaith events and talking about the symbols of the spirit of humanity like Isa, like Musa, like Rasulullah, and in that context talk about the sentiments for which Hussein stood. As far as the private space is concerned, again here we need to make a distinction that, okay, can people cut themselves? We ask a fundamental question. Best practice is constituted by the example of the Prophet. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the being of the messenger, you have the best example. لَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُ اللَّهِ, for the one who wishes to be with Allah and is desirous of the last day, وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, and remembers Allah excessively. Now here, what has the Prophet said? We don't find Prophet encouraging such practices. I mean, some might argue that he tacitly approved certain actions that might lead to this. So then we go, okay, then Imam Hussein himself, he is the grandson of the Prophet. Who better than Hussein ibn Ali to know the teachings of the Prophet? So Hussein ibn Ali, prior to his final farewell, he said to his sister Zainab, he said, don't scratch your face, don't pull your hair, don't slap your face in my grief. These maybe are texts that give us a sense of idea as to the parameters of azadari. What should azadari be? So according to this text of Hussein ibn Ali, maybe hitting blades, come on the head, yes, things like that must be avoided. As far as in the private space, having a horse and zuljana, again, if we look at the best practice of the Prophet, and if the prophetic sort of era is silent about this, then we can look at the era of the Imams, who then explained to us what the Prophet's sunnah was, and we find that they were extremely monotheistic. They frowned upon anything that distracted from God's centricity and focus on God. So again, when we look at these texts of the Imam, we will see that horses, this rich symbolism has to be curtailed as much as possible. Symbolism is good so long as it leads to God centricity, God focus, and brings to mind through that emotion the whole reason for which Hussein ibn Ali stood. I'm finishing very quickly. In addition to this, when we look at the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهَلُّكَ. Do not with your own hands cause yourselves to perish. The reason why we don't often quote the verse of the Quran in this instance is because the verse of the Quran are very ambiguous. What does destruction mean? Does destruction mean do not harm yourself to the extent that you lose life? But what if a person draws some blood? That is not losing life. Yes? But in any case, we do know that there is a red line in the book of God in which He says, do not give yourself to destruction. Now, whether that is absolute destruction or minimal destruction, if it is deliberate destruction, it is nonetheless of sort included within the verse. Yes? So a person smoking may also be within the ambit of this verse. Yes. But does it have a particular understanding or not? It's quite ambiguous. And then we have another verse that, now these two verses give us accurate parameters. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ اللَّهَ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ. Do not curse the people or swear at the people who call on to other than Allah, lest they swear at Allah in ignorance and enmity. Now, this particular verse talks about public perception. So there are two verses. One is talking about not harming oneself deliberately, ambiguously. We don't know to what extent it's saying, but it's ambiguous. And the other one is talking about public perception. If we look at these two verses, we will see that, okay, boundaries and borders are being given. And within these borders, now we can maneuver. So, if harm, self-harm is frowned upon by the Quran, and the Imam has said to his sister, don't scratch your face, don't pull out your hair, then we do know that that level of harm, yes, is something that Hussein ibn Ali salamullah alayhi frowns upon. Yes? And it is in consistency with this verse. On the other hand, Imam Sadiq, he stated, O my followers, be a means of beauty for me. Do not be a means of disgrace for me. Again, we see that Imam Sadiq is mindful of the public sphere, he is mindful of the perceptions of the people, and it is well within this verse. So again, nothing can be done that would be inconsistent with the message of Hussein ibn Ali that distracts people from message of Hussein ibn Ali. So any form of azadari that gives a misunderstanding, misrepresentation, distracts from the core of the message of Hussein ibn Ali has to be refrained from. Anything that constitutes harm in the way that Hussein ibn Ali has described in line with the verse, that should be abstained from. I leave with my final remark that even in the private space, within four closed doors, if a practice can be justified by the book of Allah, yes, and by the instructions of Rasulullah, or as explained by the successors of Rasulullah, of the instructions of Rasulullah, then fine. Provided it is not frowned upon and people are not embarrassed to talk about it. If it cannot be justified, or if it is frowned upon, or people are embarrassed, then it needs to be abstained.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Arif. Thank you. A number of thought-provoking points on the modern context and the practices of azadari. And we'll move swiftly on to Shaykh Abu Jaffar. So Shaykh, if you'd like to enlighten us with a short talk, and then we'll move on with the program. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا أبا القاسم محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه المنتجبين والغور الميامين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My topic, I prepared a very long topic, but when I look, it's just 10 minutes. So I will just summarize it in a way that it can just touch some kind of point. I call it azadari between al-hurma and al-ibah. I'm not here to say that everything in the azadari is correct and authentic, or everything in azadari is haram. I'm here to give you a food for thought for you to decide in accordance to the Quran and Sunnah and the historical facts. So there is few verses of the Holy Quran I want you to pay attention on it, and then I will continue to elaborate what I have arranged. In Surah Al-Dhariyat, Surah 51 verse 29, Allah, He speaks about the wife of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. He said, فَأَقْبَلَتِ إِمْرَأَتُهُ فِي صَرَّةٍ فَصَكَّتْ وَجْهَهَا وَقَالَتْ عَجُوزٌ عَقِيمٌ. Those who know Arabic, they will understand what Allah has said here. But for those who speak English, the verse says, thereupon his wife approached. There were some angels in the house of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they gave good tidings of the wife to get a baby after a very long time. So thereupon his wife approached the guest with a loud cry, and he struck her face and exclaimed, a barren old woman like me? But the point here is she struck her face, slapped herself. This is a point to remember. And Sayyidina Ibrahim was there. Quran doesn't say anything that Ibrahim say, you are wrong, my wife, to slap yourself in your face. All right? And then in Surah Yusuf, verse number 84, it says, وَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَا عَلَى يُوسُفَ وَأَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ قَضِيمٌ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. But he turned away from them, Yaqub alayhi salam, and said, oh, woe is me for Joseph. And his eyes became dim from the grief with which he was filled. This is Nabiullah Yaqub alayhi salam, and he became so grieved by the absence of Yusuf alayhi salam, and he turned into blind. What kind of grief was this? That someone harmed himself in accordance to the book of Allah. And then the most interesting part of Yaqub alayhi salam, he said in another verse, verse 18, وَجَاءُوا عَلَىٰ قَمِيصِهِ بِدَمٍ كَذِبٍ قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ عَلَىٰ مَا تَصِفُونَ. Subhanallah. Yaqub alayhi salam, he said this sabr that he had was so jameel, was beautiful sabr. But me and you today, when you look at this sabr, someone grieves so much and he put himself in blindness. Is it sabrun jameel, to be honest? If I have to look in my own consciousness. But Yaqub alayhi salam, he said, for sabrun jameel. This very beautiful sabr. Anyway, we go on and go on. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 248, Allah, He said, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ Dawood alayhi salam. He said, their prophet, إِنَّ آيَةُ مُلْكِهِ أَنْ يَأْتِيكُمْ تَابُوتُ فِي سَكِينَةٍ فِيهِ سَكِينَةٌ min rabbikum. And their prophet said unto them, behold, it shall be a sign of his rightful dominion that you will be granted a heart endowed by your sustainer with inner peace and with all that is enduring in the angel-born heritage left behind by the house of Moses and the house of Aaron. Herein, behold, there shall indeed be a sign for you if you are truly believers. Taboot, there was a relics of Moses and Aaron. It was there. So is for remembrance. Historical heritage is a cultural symbol of Bani Israel that Allah, He gave them for them to remember. I want you to digest these couple verses, and those who know Quran and tafsir, they will just digest more and more and more, because I don't have much time. And then the last verse in Surah 14, it says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى, verse 5, Surah 14, verse 5, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا أَنْ أَخْرِجْ قَوْمَكَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَذَكِّرُهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ. Just underline this word, وَذَكِّرُهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ, and remind them about the days of Allah. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِكُلِّ صَبَّارٍ شَكُورٍ. There is signs for everyone who is patient and grateful. So it is in this context that the Holy Quran reminds us about many events. It says, for example, وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالِ الْعَشْرِ وَالشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي هِجْرٍ. All of you remembering about the history of the world. ثُمَّ هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ مُوسَى. It continues. So in this there is a lot of reminder in Surah Al-Fajr if you continue to read it. So my topic is azadari between al-hurma, between being forbidden, and also permissibility of it, the aspect. It is in between. So I'm not here to justify everything that has been done, cutting yourself and gushing the blood. I don't endorse that at all. I say it openly. And I'm not here to say that to grieve for Hussein is haram. To grieve for Hussein is a sunnah of Rasulullah, as we will see it here. The commemoration of the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in every month of Muharram in azadari form has its root in the factors, in two factors or more. These factors can be traced as a historical reaction. When Shia started doing azadari openly, it was a historical reaction, we will see here, of the Shias against the enemies of Ahlul Bayt. The political and religious extremism of Al-Qaramita. Also, it is the effect of the historical extremism of Al-Qaramita. Those who don't know about Qaramita, they are the Shias. They had their headquarters and their empire in Bahrain. It was called Dawlatul Ihsa, as maybe 4 centuries of Islam. The Qaramita, they did a lot of evil in the history. They are the ones who were responsible of taking the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone from Mecca, and took it to Bahrain. And it stayed there for 22 years. So for 22 years, the Muslims didn't have Hajar al-Aswad in Mecca because it was taken by Al-Qaramita. They were the Shias, Imamiyya. So also in the time of Safawi Empire, they were responsible of establishing a ministry called Al-Wizara Lish-Sha'air Al-Husayniyya, Department of the Commemoration of Al-Hussein. They are the one actually who are really responsible for making azadari publicly. So they put a lot of things which is not Islam. They smuggle some of the things from some kind of Asia Minor Christians. They used to have their flagellation in English. I'm not an English speaker actually, it is my third language, so I just try to speak to you. So they took some kind of culture from Christians who were near to Caucasus Mountains, they used to hit themselves when they remember Isa alayhi salam, that he was crucified for them. So they used to do that in order to get the pain and suffering of Jesus. So it was smuggled by the Safawis into Shia Islam, but actually it is not a part of Shia. However, it has been taken by some Shias who are common people as it's a part of azadari, unfortunately, nowadays. So this is why the research work is so important for every one of us to know where is the truth and where is falsehood. So, stuff is error during the era. And factor of remembrance of Allah days. The factor of remembrance of Allah's days. The Shias, we believe that the Battle of Karbala is one of the days of Allah, because those who knows Quran and Sunnah very well, a hadith of Rasulullah very well, there is a hadith called Hadithu Al-Qarura, which is narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, in which Ibn Abbas was sleeping, and this hadith, it can be traced. I will mention to you very famous book, you can get it, and Tarikh Al-Khulafa of Imam Suyuti, he narrated this hadith, and you can find it nowadays. It is in English. It is sold even in Coventry Road, those who are closer to Coventry Road. So you can find the hadith Al-Qarura, which is narrated by Ibn Abbas, and he was sleeping, and he dreamed Rasulullah in his night, and when he dreamed Rasulullah, he found Rasulullah, he gave him Al-Qarura, a bottle full of blood. And Ibn Abbas asked him, what is this? He said, this is the blood of Al-Hussein. Today, he has been murdered in Iraq. So Ibn Abbas, when he woke up, he asked about the people, and he found out it was the time that Al-Hussein was murdered. Also, we will find, inshallah, I will give you the book and the page of the hadith in future when we read it. So, the practice of Syrians. Let us see what was the practice of Ahlul Sham after the days of Al-Hussein. According to the history of Ibn Kathir, Al-Bidayah wal Nihaya, volume 8, page 1108, it says, in contrast to the Shia, the Syrians will prepare nice foods, adorn themselves with special clothes, wear perfumes, and treat the day of martyrdom as a day of great happiness. A variety of foods were cooked to show their great happiness and pleasure. The purpose behind all of this was to act different to the Shias, because they believe you have to khalif al-rawafid, you have to do something different to the Rawafids, all right? So the Shias are commemorating about Imam Hussein, his death and mourning. They used to be happy, Ahlul Sham, all right? Specific. So now, according to Ibn Kathir, also, Al-Bidayah wal Nihaya, volume 8, page 1108, it is stated also about the Shias. In 400 Hijri, during the reign of Al-Ayyubiyin, the Shia crossed all limits. That's how he said. Drums were beaten to inform the people about the great day of martyrdom. It was a reaction. These are happy, so we don't want to be happy. We are doing against them. You know this type of kullu hizbin bimaladayhi farihun, which is sometimes, to some extent, is bad. That you shouldn't react because someone has done this, but you have to stick to the truth. Anyway, let us see what Ibn Kathir said. In Baghdad and other big cities, ashes and the husk were thrown into the street and the roads. Black curtains were hung on shops. People declared their grief and sorrow. They wept, and many of them abstained from drinking water, because Hussein was martyred in a state of hunger. All right, same thing, that he wanted to suffer like how Imam Hussein have suffered, so we don't drink water. But it has implication for Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, who was the son of Imam Hussein. For more than 30 years, he didn't laugh. He didn't laugh at all. But on the day when Umar bin Sa'd was martyred and killed, he smiled, Imam Zain al-Abidin, after many years. Because imagine if you are a young boy, you see your father is being slaughtered in front of you. Imam Zain al-Abidin, he saw, he witnessed that. So, severed his head by Umar bin Sa'd and Shimr bin the Jawshan. So, he never laughed. But the day that Umar bin Sa'd was murdered by Mukhtar, he smiled, Imam Zain al-Abidin. Means, little bit, he was happy to see the enemy of his father was murdered. So Shia women ventured on barefooted and barehead. They wept, lamented, and moaned. Is a reaction of those Al-Sham who are doing that. Our historical narrations and historical facts have ample testimonies which indicate that the Messenger of Allah, his companions, and his family members did mourn their dead and eternalize their sorrows within their hearts and sometimes openly. The mourning and shedding of blood on the day of Ashura by the Shias is a protest against oppression of Muawiyah and his descendants. Okay, we may say that Muawiyah was Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Yes, he's a Sahaba, but we Shia believe that the oppression starts from there. We don't want to go on this because we don't want to put differences, but we wanted to mention this. It should be academic research. To research. You can ask yourself why Shia, they have to believe that Muawiyah is such. You can go and do research. Maybe the Shias are wrong, maybe you are right, maybe they are right, maybe you are wrong. You know, it's a time that we have to come out from this sectarianism and do real research. We Muslims are the only people that we don't put our money in research. We don't put our money in research, we put our money in petty things. If we put our money in research, we get our young people to research the truth, then the differences will just go like that. Because we will be there full of knowledge, full of awareness and consciousness. So, likewise, remembering of the martyrs is sunnah of the Prophet and practice of Sahaba radiallahu anhum. We read in Al-Bidayah wal Nihaya, volume 4, page 45, published in Beirut. It is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to visit graves of martyrs every year. Right? When he would reach the entrance of the mountain, Uhud, he, the Holy Prophet, will say to the martyrs, Assalamu alaikum bima sabartum. This means peace upon you due to your patience, and you have reached pleasant place due to this. Then, after the Prophet, Abu Bakr also used to come every year. Abu Bakr, Sahaba radiallahu anhu, the first Caliph, used to go to Uhud every year. And after him, Umar radiallahu anhu used to do the same. And then Osman radiallahu anhu also used to do the same. So there is no question why you visit the grave, why you go to this, why you go to. Is the sunnah of the Prophet, is the sunnah of the Sahaba to do that. Now, there is also a year called Amul Huzn. Tell me. Okay. Amul Huzn. Alright? Rasulullah declared the whole year is a Am of Huzn when Khadija radiallahu anha and Abu Talib died. All Muslims remember the history. When Khadija radiallahu anha died and Abu Talib died, the Holy Prophet declared that year is the Amul Huzn. Alright? The day of grief. Grief. The writers of Sirah are unanimously that the Holy Prophet named the year in which Khadija and Abu Talib died. So you say, oh, we are not supposed to be making grief all the time, but the Holy Prophet declared the year to be the year of Huzn. Now let us see our Muslim Ahl Sunnah scholars, how they mourn. Let us see historically. Imam al-Haramain, whose actual name was Abdul Malik, or Ziauddin as his title, according to Allama Shibli Nu'mani, was considered as a supreme scholar of his era. And many renowned scholars were his students, which included Imam Ghazali and so on. Imam Ghazali, while mentioned in the morning over his death, rise in his authority, Kamil Sa'adat, page 3, Imam Ghazali said, the Imam of Haramain died 478 Hijri. At that time, all the market stalls in Nishapur were closed, and the pulpit in the Jami Mosque was broken. His students, that numbered almost 400, destroyed their books and pens and mourned him for a whole year. I beg your pardon. They destroyed even the member of the scholar. They destroyed their books, their pen, and they mourned the whole year for the scholar. Right? According to the biography of Imam Ghazali, written by Imam Shibli and Norman. So we go on. I don't want to mention kind of others, but now let us see the sabr of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Sabr of Nabi when his son died, Ibrahim alayhi salam. We read in Sahih Bukhari, volume 2, book 23, hadith number 390, narrated Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu. We went with Allah apostle to the blacksmith Abu Saif, and he was the husband of the witness of Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet. Allah's apostle took Ibrahim and kissed him and smelled him. And later we entered Abu Saif's house, and at that time Ibrahim was in the last breath, and the eyes of Allah's apostle started shedding tears. Abdurrahman bin Auf said, O Allah's apostle, even you are crying and weeping? He said, O Ibn Auf, this is mercy. Then he wept more and more and said, the eyes are shedding tears and the heart is grieved, and we will not say except what pleases our Lord. O Ibrahim, indeed we are grieved by your separation. The whole Prophet was saying, indeed we are grieved by your separation. Like how this is grieving. It is not, there is no sin for someone to say this when he make azadari. Now, let us see Rasulullah's sabr at the death of his uncle Abu Talib. Sheikh Sibt ibn Jawz, in his book Tazkiratul Khawas, page 6, he said, Ali narrates, when news of the death of my father reached the Prophet, he began to cry profusely. I don't know profusely, you English people, you know better. And he ordered that he would perform his ghusl, burial rites, and burial rites. May Allah send his blessing and mercy on him. The Prophet at the death of his grandfather now, he cried and grieved. Now let us see when the Holy Prophet, his grandfather, died when he was a young man. As evidence we shall rely on, in Tarikh al-Khumais, volume 1, page 235, he said, Ayman narrates, I saw Rasulullah as a child crying at the funeral of his grandfather Abdul Muttalib. He was crying. He's a human being. No, you shouldn't cry. When you cry, you're getting sin. Subhanallah. Bibi Aisha radiallahu anha, you know what she said about this? He said, Allah taziru wa ziratun wizra ughra. He heard someone saying, Rasulullah, he said, if you cry, the mayyit is being punished because you are crying. And Bibi Aisha, he returned that hadith by saying, how can he be punished? Allah, he said, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Nobody will be punished for the sin of someone else. Anyway, this is the issue. So people are crying because they are grieving, they are human beings. So when we see the grandson of the Prophet, whom we love, the whole Prophet we love his family were murdered. What's wrong with all of us that we cannot grieve? Rasulullah, with regard to the suffering of Mawla Ali, you know what he said? We read Fazail Sahaba now of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, volume 2, page 965, hadith number 1357. The Holy Prophet said, an angel that has never visited me before entered my house today and said to me, this son of yours will be killed. Can you imagine that? The angel is coming to inform the Holy Prophet that this son of yours is going to be killed. If you wish, I can give you some soil from the earth wherein he shall die. The Prophet then said, the angel brought to me the soil. That soil was red. That the soil was the soil of Karbala. In the footnote of this book, Fazail Sahaba, the chain is Sahih according to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, has brought this hadith in the Musnad, as did Al-Haythami in Majma' al-Zawaid. Imam Hajar ibn Haythami, in his book Al-Majma' al-Zawaid, he narrated the very hadith. And Imam Tabrani and Abu Ya'la and the Bazzaz, they say all narrators are thiqat. What does the angel wanted to show the Holy Prophet by bringing the soil of Karbala to the Prophet, wherein Imam Hussein was killed, for remembrance. This is very, very important. And in Musnad Abu Ya'la al-Musili, volume 1, page 298, hadith number 363, Abdullah ibn Naji narrated from his father, who said, I went with Ali, they faced Ninawa, which is Iraq, and they were going to the Battle of Siffin. Then Ali called out and said, O Abu Abdullah, have patience. Ali, he called Imam Hussein. He was in the army of his father when they were going to the Battle of Siffin. O Abu Abdullah, have patience. Have patience on the bank of Euphrates. I asked, what do you mean by Abu Abdullah? Ali replied, one day I went into the room. Listen carefully. One day I went into the room sorry. One day I went to the room of the Prophet ﷺ, which his eyes were gushing with tears. I therefore asked him, O Prophet, have someone angered you? What makes your eyes gush with tears? He replied, Gabriel has just left me. He, Gabriel, told me that Hussein will be killed on the banks of Euphrates River. Gabriel then said to him, shall I tell you, should I let you smell his soil wherein Hussein will be killed? I said yes. So Gabriel extended his hand and presented a handful of the soil and gave it to me. I was then unable to prevent my eyes from gushing into tears. Hussein Asad Salim said, the chain is Hassan. Imam Al-Haythami said the chain of this narration is Hassan. Sayyidina Uthman, now we see what he did. Sayyidina the third Khalif, anhu, he said, lost his visual sense when the Prophet died. See carefully. So when you see somebody is crazy, you love someone, you love Hussein, you will be crazy. Right? The strangeness of Shias, that they beat their chest and somebody else feeling the pain. I don't know why. We should be feeling pain, is it so? But somebody else is feeling pain. But this is how it is. But the education is so important, for someone to read. So now let us see Sayyidina Uthman, the third Caliph, what he did. We read in Tabakat ibn Sa'd, volume 2, page 312. Abdullah bin Amr bin As narrated that Uthman bin Affan said, when Allah's messenger passed away, some men among his companions were bereaved until they were close to get scalpel, and I was also among those bereaved ones. I don't know, bereaved, because he has to be what? He lost his sense. In huzn, great huzn. The whole Medina was huzn. While I was sitting in a house in Medina, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was chosen as Caliph. Umar walked past me, but my distress was such that I did not even know that he passed by. Said Uthman, he said, Umar passed in front of me, I didn't even know, I didn't even witness that he is passing in front of me. He was grieved. This is how sometimes. Now let us see al-Mu'minin Aisha radiallahu anha, what she did. When his brother died, when his brother was killed. We read in Tariq Abdul Fida, volume 1, page 179, when the news of her brother's death reached Aisha, she mourned at his suffering, and after praying, she would curse the killer of his brother. You see the issue? Bibi Aisha cursed the killer of her brother. When the news news of Muhammad's murder reached Ali, he also mourned. We read in authority of Musnad Imam Azam, Imam Abu Hanifa, in page 179, on the evening of the time of death of the Prophet, Abu Bakr said, "Oh, woe is me, my back has been broken." Shouting, he said, "My back has been broken," the first caliph, right? Also, we read in the authority of Aisha, lost her sabr and he tried to commit suicide. Can you imagine? When the Holy Prophet died, Bibi Aisha tried to commit suicide. You tell me now, if someone hit his chest and someone who wants to commit suicide, which one is doing grievous? Let us say something strict. Look at the hadith narrated by Imam Bukhari, Babu al-Nikah, volume 7, book 62, hadith number 138. Narrated Al-Qasim, Aisha radiallahu anha said that whenever the Prophet intended to go in a journey, he drew lots among his wives, so as to take one of them along with him. During one of his journey, the lot fell on Aisha and Hafsa. When night fell, it continued. Aisha said, "I agree." So Aisha rode, then the Prophet came. It was Aisha's camel, on which Hafsa was riding. He greeted her.
Sheikh, apologies, if you could make your
Time.
concluding remarks, yeah.
Anyway, he wished if he could have committed suicide when the Holy Prophet died. Because out of love and grief, it may happen. Alright? So, time is over, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so, sorry. I think, Sheikh, I can leave this in case.
We will get questions and answers.
Yeah, okay, good.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Sheikh Abu Jaffar, thank you. So Sheikh has given us a historical basis of the foundations and practices of azadari with reference to the Quran, the historical facts, the Sunnah, and with reference to numerous texts. So moving swiftly on, we will now have our final address by Sheikh Ali Raza Bujani for a few minutes, and then we'll open up for questions.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammad wa ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Just very briefly, to maybe put the previous discussions into some broader context, it's very clear that the message of Islam is a simple one, that is directing these teachings of Rasulullah are there for nothing more than to move humankind towards godliness, to assist humankind in moving towards fulfilling that beautiful human potential, epitomizing Rasulullah, and after him those chosen Ahlul Bayt from his progeny. And we see again and again the Quran, the Prophet, salawatullahi wassalamu alayhi, and the Ahlul Bayt emphasizing a value-based approach to religion and its teachings. If we take that pillar of religion, as-salat, the umud ad-din, okay, we see again it's pushing us, the Quran, the teachings of Rasulullah, the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, to ensure that all of these things are moving us towards godliness and goodliness, towards our relationship with God and our communion with other people. So look at the example of how the Quran describes salat. On one side it says, Aqimus salatu li dhikri, establish prayer for my remembrance. Okay, for God centricity. On the other hand it says, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That salat is that thing which repels corruption and vice. This is a value-based approach to the teachings of Islam. We have hadith attributed to Rasulullah himself, where it says that I'm paraphrasing the hadith. It says that the hadith, that salat, which doesn't move you towards, or move you away from munkar and towards ma'ruf, has given you nothing but more distance from God. Okay, so we can see these principles as giving us a criterion to assess every teaching of Islam in the way that is practiced by Muslims today. Are these practices, are these teachings as they've evolved through history and the understanding of humankind, are they moving us towards godliness? Are they moving us towards goodliness? The remembrance of Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi should be treated no differently. Are the practices of the remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali moving us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are they moving us towards becoming better individuals? Look, anything in Islam, anything which is practiced in the name of Islam, like even the salat according to that hadith of Rasulullah, if it isn't a means towards Allah, it becomes an idol. It's the same for the remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali. If this remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali isn't a means towards God, it isn't a means towards bettering ourselves and bettering those around us, again, maybe it has become an idol. Of course, the remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali can be a beautiful vehicle towards those human qualities which he stood for, of justice, of integrity, of compassion, of loyalty, of brotherhood, and of truth. Of course, this remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali can be a beautiful means to remind us of our absolute dependency upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His intimacy with us. But if the practices of his remembrance don't move us in this direction, they must be reconsidered. But before touching further on this remembrance of, the azadari, the remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali itself, look at the ethos of Hussein ibn Ali first and foremost. Salamullahi alayhi. Look, it was mentioned by Shaykh Arif earlier. It's reported that he set out, and stated his reasons for doing so. In that report, we see he mentions, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبَ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. That I have left for no other reason but to seek the betterment, to seek the reform, the islah of my grandfather's community. Just this part is sufficient for us to look at a basis between what was the motivations of Hussein ibn Ali himself, and accordingly what should be the motivations of his remembrance. And we see two key elements here. One is this for the purpose of islah, for the purposes of betterment, of moving towards those goals set out by Islam, of moving us to be more God-centered individuals and better human beings. Islah. Secondly, he said, fi ummati jaddi, I seeking this reform within the community of my grandfather. So it wasn't a purely personal mission. It was in no way a personal mission. It wasn't a mission, at least he didn't view this movement as a mission for himself, for his family, for the people of Medina or the people of Kufa. No, he viewed it as a mission of seeking betterment from the ummah of his grandfather. And we know the ummah of his grandfather has no bounds. For as Muslims, we believe he was a rahmatun lil alameen. So the question comes now, if Hussein ibn Ali himself set out to seek betterment, to seek that godliness which Islam prescribes for individuals to pursue, if his objectives were the seeking this betterment for the sake of broader society and humanity at large, when we look at our practices of his remembrance, of course they can be a beautiful means towards these ends, but they must be judged against these criteria. When we look at azadari itself, we can see it has personal aspects and it has societal and universal aspects, potentially. The practice of remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali can be a means, potentially, for reaffirming one's connection with the awliya of God, of refocusing towards those qualities which they stood for, of seeking betterment, in aspiring towards what those people stood for, through expression of love, through grief, through identifying the qualities, understanding the tribulations which they faced. The azadari has societal objectives and purposes, yes, developing out of a protest movement, to remind people, expressing to society, to portray that message. Hussein ibn Ali, who himself was of course brutally murdered by people whose own rituals led them to no value. He was killed by people who prayed salat, who performed Sawm and who memorized the Quran. But where was the value in those acts? That it could lead them to slaughter Hussein ibn Ali and his family. In the very same way that remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali must be judged against these criteria of whether or not it is moving us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it is making us better people. Of course, the personal practices of devotion in the name of Hussein ibn Ali can be a beautiful vehicle and means to these goals. But ultimately they must be judged on the basis of their societal and universal impact. How are they impacting the portrayal of that message of Hussein ibn Ali? To practice one's religion for the values of Rasulullah, the values of aspiring towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and becoming better people. After all, as we have already stated, he himself said that the purpose of my mission was to seek the reform, the betterment of his grandfather's ummah. His mission was to seek the reform of humanity at large. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you, Shaykh Arif. Thank you very much. Thank you on your focus on remembrance of Imam Hussein, considering the practices of azadari, moving towards godliness and goodliness. We've had three broad talks with a wealth of thought, content and information, all converging towards one remembrance of the tragedy of Abdullah. We will now move on to some questions, and we'll take questions, a mixture through some of the online questions being submitted by online viewers, as well as questions from here in the audience. We will limit the questions to the topic of Muharram and the practices of azadari, and unfortunately I will have to stop you if you are deviating from the topic. I humbly request you to channel the questions through myself, and I will then ask our scholars to respond and to enter into a discourse. So first of all, perhaps we can start with a question which is apt with your concluding remarks, Shaykh Ali Raza. And it's a question directed towards yourself, but perhaps the other scholars may be able to contribute as well. So first of all, does that mean, following on from your talk, that one should stop performing an act of worship if one does not? For example, do we stop praying if it does not keep us away from munkar?
Very, very bluntly, no. Okay, so the context of my comments was in line with those acts which are not prescribed through justifiable means and attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. There's certain minimum things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed in the Quran, which are agreed upon. The foundation of those things, as we've mentioned, was considered a pillar of Islamic religion, is salat. Okay, so yes, recognizing the purpose of these prescribed acts can actually assist us in approaching their value. These acts become empty when we don't recognize their potential, and very, very quickly can become obstacles in pursuit of those objectives. But if we're talking about non-designated acts of devotion, okay, non-designated and prescribed acts, okay, of relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they were to not assist us in our movement towards God, or they were to lead to societal detriment, then of course they should be abandoned. But the baseline of accepting those things which are agreed upon unequivocally through Allah's book and through the sunnah of Rasulullah, how it has been taught by the Imams after him, absolutely not. We shouldn't leave them if we don't see them as helping us on our journey. What we need to recognize is the objectives and try to reinvest our action of these rituals towards attaining those goals.
Thank you very much. Shaykh Abu Jaffar, Shaykh Arif, did you want to add on that at all?
I just want to follow on from Shaykh Ali Raza's comments. Actually, what he said makes a lot of sense. not the act itself, let's say the salah, because these are red lines, minimum prescriptions of Allah. But if a person is going to a particular place and discharging their prayers where the whole atmosphere is inconducive to God-centricity and acquisition of good human morals, then I'm sure you will agree on the basis of your talk that the person should then avoid going to such a place for the performance of the obligatory act. So it does have relevance in that sense of which space is a space that is conducive for the act.
Okay. Thank you very much. Perhaps if we can start with some questions from the audience. Are there any questions? And then we have a roaming mic that will be passed along towards you. Yeah? Okay, just here at the front.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. My question is directed to Shaykh Abu Jaffar. Basically, you were talking about a person considering committing suicide after a bereavement. Wouldn't it be that they have mental health issues rather than just suffering from grief? Whereas azadari is for the remembrance as well as expressing grief, and can even be argued to be a form of spiritual therapy for those who have faced bereavement, because there is no grief that is faced and worse than what Imam Hussein faced in Karbala.
If I understand your question, is that first, let me tell you that hadith or narrations in theological perspectives are termed as dhanniyu sudur. Dhanniyu sudur means its presence is due upon dhanna, conjecture, until it has been verified through its sanad and through its matan text that it does not contradict with the Quran or historical facts. Then it is called sahih when it is verified. So as for the hadith that Bibi Aisha was so grieved and sad, it can be true because the hadith is termed as sahih, and historical facts it may help because she was taken by the Holy Prophet as a very tender and younger age, according to what they are saying. And if a girl to that age lived with a husband and suddenly she grown up in the house of the Messenger of Allah, she learned from the Messenger of Allah, she was cared by the Messenger of Allah, and quite a sudden the Messenger of Allah died, it was like not only the husband but the father, everything for her. She may be so sorrowful to such extent that she may feel like dying and follow her. It may happen, not necessarily being a mental situation. I don't think that we can say that she was suffering from that. I took it as a so grieved, she was so grieved being in the house of the Messenger of Allah since during the time of that age, grown up in the house of the Messenger of Allah. She missed the mercy of Rasulullah. She missed the love of Rasulullah. And this, it happened to all of us sometimes. You can miss your wife, you can miss your husband, you can miss your son, and to such extent that you will wish if, you could have died before him or before her. It happens sometimes. I think I will rather believe in that rather than thinking that she was suffering from such kind of,
Sure, and just to clarify, does the narration talk about Lady Aisha having thoughts of suicide, as in not wanting to be here because of the bereavement that she suffered, or is it about further more than that? Is it about intent? How far do those thoughts go? Does it go into any of that detail?
You mean that she was intending to do that, or
was it more about thoughts of not wanting to be here in the context of the bereavement?
No, thoughts. It was not. She was not intending to commit suicide, I think. Okay.
Okay. Just to add on to that,
yes.
Well, certainly in the UK, 60 to 70% of suicides are nothing to do with mental health at all.
Wow.
So it's often to do with kind of contextual environmental factors as well.
Oh, it's good that the doctor came to my rescue.
Perhaps if you take a question from online, and then we'll take another question from the floor. So I think this is a question open up to all of our scholars. why is it that people feel it's important to attend majalis in person instead of watching on the internet, especially if we don't have a speaker that attracts us? So the question is, why is it that people feel it's important to attend majalis in person rather than perhaps listening online?
Do people feel that?
This is the question that's been posed.
I don't know. I need to know if people feel that, and if people do feel that, then either I can draw on my own experiences or I can guess why people feel that, so it won't be an accurate response. Okay. As far as I would be concerned, as far as I'm concerned, I would like to attend the mosque because I'm indoctrinated, because that's the only way I have known from childhood, recollections, memories, or maybe because of the social factor, other people, the ambience, the whole beating of chest, the listening of lamentations, the wanting to cry and empty the heart, and the atmosphere, it doesn't feel the same online. I'm just guessing.
Okay. Is there anything further with that particular question, or shall we move on? Do you have any other questions from the floor? So yes, who's got the mic? Yeah. Would you like to go first, and then we'll go to yourself afterwards?
Assalamu alaikum. In some communities, people fast for the day of Ashura, and in some community, people are doing Faka. And this year, we had lots of discussion in our community that when this Faka come about? Because as far as we were concerned, there was always Roza. So when this Faka, and then they were saying, Faka is for Khushi, Roza is for when you're Khushi, and Faka is when you're for Gham. I'm very confused about it, so if you can help.
Shall I take this one? It was recommended to fast on the day of Ashura. Obviously, it was a tradition that had already been there. Now, what happened was that Umayyah tried to, now this is after reading, and then of course the theological aspects are there as well. So Banu Umayyah tried to downplay the whole event of Karbala and the commotion caused by it, by associating the death of Hussein ibn Ali with joy at the saving of Islam and fasting as a thanksgiving. Now the response of the Imams was that in that case the fast, because it wasn't an obligatory fast, it was a recommended fast, but the objectives that were being brought about by that fast were highly detrimental and damaging, that fast should be removed, and in its place there should be a faqa, hunger and thirst, not termed as fast because before sunset something is consumed at the time of Asr. So here we do see something quite extraordinary, the flexibility within the law system if it's not yielding the objective. But of course, as Dr. Ali Raza said, the red lines are those minimalistic prescriptions of Allah. They have to be upheld, but there is a lot of leverage beyond those minimal prescriptions. And at times within the minimal prescriptions itself as well, the Quran has shown a lot of leverage in terms of what we talk of form and essence. So we find that when the objectives are not being attained by even the obligatory acts, the goalposts are then moved. Yes? So we might find instances of that within the Quran itself, within the conduct of the Blessed Prophet, and later on in the conduct of the Imams. So in the case of fast, because the fast was associated with the joy for the event of Karbala, the fast had become counterproductive in that way, in bringing about God-centricity, awareness of righteousness, fair play, justice, social reform. The Bani Umayyah had also concocted many ahadith, yes? They had concocted a hadith, and that's why we say that hadith may be sahih, hasan, muwathaq, whatever it may be. But if it conflicts with the Quran, it's worth nothing. And if it conflicts with human intuition and reason, it means nothing. So we have hadith that fight alongside every ruler. If they fight and engage in a wrongful battle, then you will have the reward of performance of jihad, they will have the sin of wrongful murder. Or pray behind every imam, even if he is the committer, even if he commits major sins. You will have the reward of praying jama'at, and he will have the punishment of being a huge sinner. Now, of course, these ahadith do not make sense within themselves, yes? But that was the era when these sort of things were being concocted, and the things that were within religion that were valuable, growth, promoting, productive, were then used for other means. Or as Ali ibn Abi Talib said about the Kharijis, when they said, La hukma illa lillah, that let us come upon arbitration through the Quran, when Muawiyah sent the Quran on top of the spears, and he said, Quran will arbitrate for us when Muawiyah is losing, Ali ibn Abi Talib remarked, Kalimatul haq yuradu biha al-batil. They speak the truth, but they intend falsehood through it. Huh?
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything further to add on that, or shall we move on? Sheikh, yeah.
What Shaykh Arif have said is very important, but there is another opinion on the fasting of Ashura. When we look all of these narrators of the hadith of the fasting of Ashura, it was Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Abu Huraira, Ibn Abbas, Muawiyah, I think 4 of them. Let me remember 4 of them. They are the one who narrated the hadith of the fasting of Ashura. So if you trace their biography now, that is the problem. You will find there is a problem of the hadith. First, Ibn Abbas, during this incident, in which the Holy Prophet immigrated to Medina and saw the Jews fasting in Medina, and then he asked them, what are you doing? They said, we are fasting this day because Allah saved Moses in this day. And he said, we are haqqu of following Moses than you. Then he commanded the Muslim to fast on that day. So Ibn Abbas, he was 4 years old boy, and he was in Mecca. He was not in Medina. So the narrator narrates something that he was not a witness of this event. So those who study the science of hadith, they will know the illah, the fact of the hadith of Ibn Abbas. Second narrator was Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he became Muslim in Mecca, and then the Holy Prophet sent him to Yemen, to his own people, his own tribe, to propagate Islam. And he did not go to Medina except after the Battle of Khaybar. And the incident of the fasting of Ashura happened in the first year of Hijrah. All right? So if Abu Musa al-Ash'ari narrated the story of Medina while he was not in Medina, then the hadith, it has another defect. Another narrator of the hadith is Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu also, who was in Yemen. He became Muslim after the Battle of Khaybar. So he was not in Medina during the time of immigration of the Holy Prophet. And so do Muawiyah, who became Muslim after the conquest of Mecca. So he narrated the story which was not, he was not a part of that. He didn't say, I heard someone, I saw someone, or somebody told me. He said the Holy Prophet, when he entered Medina, as if he narrating something that he was a witness of that incident. So the hadith, it has defect. Next to that, the hadith speak about Rasulullah, he followed the Jews. Imagine Rasulullah, he is supposed to be followed by the Jews, but here Rasulullah is following the Jews. Imagine Rasulullah, he is supposed to be asked by the Jews, but he is asking the Jews, why are you fasting? As if he is unaware of the history, of the calendar of the Jews, of what is the tradition of the Jews. He was aware. Because Rasulullah, he was revealed by Allah about the culture of the Jews, the culture of the Christians. The book bear witness, the Quran, that it speak about the Jews, speak about it. So it is all kind of thing. Anyway, I don't want to go further. But what Shaykh has said is the first option, and then this is the second option. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Shaykh Abu Jaffar. Thank you very much. I think there's a question. Yes, the gentleman in the blazer.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question, I would appreciate if it's answered in more of a historical and political perspective rather than an Islamic perspective. And it's like twofold question. That if Imam Hussain refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid, was it a good move to go towards Kufa rather than, he should have been waited for Muslim bin Aqil to come back? And second, if after the tragedy of Karbala, Bani Umayyad almost ruled for 100 years, and then Bani Abbas using the same political slogan of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So, as Dr. Ali was saying earlier, that if it was for the reform within the Ummah, then why Imams did not take the lead to reform the Ummah rather than Mukhtar Sagafi or Zaid bin Zainul Abidin alayhi salam? Thank you very much.
Who would like to take that?
I can start, but I don't think I can give you everything you're looking for, okay, because I'm not a historian, okay? But I think we have to understand, or seek to understand, what Imam Hussain meant by reform, okay? And this I think this is important in terms when we look at the heritage of the Ahlul Bayt in its entirety, you know, as teachers of Rasulullah's sunnah and objectives. You know, our understanding of reform may be socio-political reform, it may be development of, I don't know, if we look at legal reform in the UK, it has a different objective. If we look at reform of economic policy in the UK, it would say, yeah, our objective is increasing GDP, increasing gross domestic profit, okay? When we're looking at reform as enacted by the Ahlul Bayt, okay, and as set out by Rasulullah, it seems to me that that reform is directed towards moving people towards godliness and goodliness. Okay, so it's fundamentally about individual, okay, spiritual and moral direction. That's the reform which it seems to me that Ahlul Bayt were most fundamentally interested in. Okay, not necessarily power, okay, and political structures. Okay, so having that twist, okay, would make you, I think, survey history in a very, very different way. It seems to me that Ahlul Bayt were, in a sense, very much idealists. Okay, ultimately they were idealists. Of course, they took pragmatic decisions. Okay, and sought to take the best course of action in accordance with their particular circumstances. But if we look, for example, at Imam Ali, salamullahi alayhi, okay, at Siffin, which has been mentioned already. Okay, we see why did he accept the arbitration at the point of Muawiyah raising spears. We have certain traditions which suggest that Malik al-Ashtar came to him and said, let me carry on. I'm at the point of overtaking Muawiyah's camp. Okay, let me carry on. Okay, and soon the rest will follow once we've overpowered the enemy. Imam Ali said, no, I can't do that, because it undermines the principles of justice. It undermines the principles of the reform which he wanted to prescribe. Okay, which fundamentally to me seems to be first and foremost individual transformation. Okay, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards becoming better peoples. Thus can society move towards real and substantial development and reform. Yeah, so I think we need to look at it from that question. It's not about victory of power. Some have interpreted Imam Ali, so if we look at some Western non-Muslim scholars who have been very, very, have given a hugely, counter reading of history compared to the dominant Western readings of history in favor of Imam Ali. But they say on this point, they say he was naive. Okay, on this incident of Siffin. But they're judging the success of Imam Ali's reform, Imam Hussein's reform, on socio-political outcomes, rather than moral and spiritual outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. That's a very important question, actually. You see, we need to take the bare facts that are out there, not embellish it beyond what is factual and try to interpret from it from the minimalistic extent. Now, you see, Imam Hussain Salamullah alayhi was in danger in Medina and in Mecca because they were seeking his allegiance. And he feared for his life, and he knew that he would not be safe there. Two, the people of Kufa were writing to him excessively saying, we are without a leader, we want reform, we want a righteous person to lead us. These were the circumstances at hand. So, according to this, he actually did not have much choice but to direct himself towards Kufa. Medina and Mecca could not offer him safety. So he had to direct himself towards Kufa. As far as, and I'm thinking about some minimal implications here, as far as engaging in a battle was concerned, that might not have been something that he had chosen, but it was something to which he was being led and he could not avoid, and he had accepted that. Now, if he makes a statement, طلبا لإصلاح في أمتي جدي وأمة جدي وأبي, I've only come out in order to seek reform. That was in the context, because the people of Kufa were talking about reformation. They were talking about a tyrant. So Hussain ibn Ali Salamullah alayhi, in response, he said, look, my grandfather has said this, that he who sees somebody blatantly against Allah and His Messenger and does not do anything to stop such a person with his hands or tongue or intention belongs with that tyrant. So here now Yazid was blatantly against Islam. Muawiyah was somebody who was corrupt. He wasn't a good man, yes? But at least openly he wasn't doing all those things. Yazid is reported to have said, and I think we find this and we need to study it more, that the Bani Hashim has just played a joke with all of us. There has been no revelation, there has been no angel, there has been no messenger. And of course Yazid had also said that if only my forefathers at Badr who had lost their lives to Ali's sword had been alive, they would be condoning me, saying, yes, you have sought revenge and killed one of theirs, which means Hussein. So Yazid was very openly transgressing against the commandments of Allah and His Messenger. And that is why Hussain ibn Ali was focusing on the conduct of Yazid. He says, he who sees the like of Yazid and then doesn't oppose him, they are committing a huge crime. Yes? They belong with Yazid. He did not say about Muawiyah, he did not say about anybody else, but Yazid, he said it. I mean, he was very vocal against Muawiyah as well. In Mina, a year prior to Karbala, he spoke against Muawiyah, Imam Hussain, very emphatically. He says, do you not see their pulpits and how they're propagating and how there is no sense of social justice and righteousness is being corrupted? So Imam Hussein's disposition was this, that he could not withstand these people. But when it did come to Yazid and he sought bay'ah to legitimize, because Hussain after all was a very prominent person. Yes, people remembered him as the grandson of the Prophet, as the Imam who sits or stands, as the head of the youths of paradise. So his bay'ah would have legitimized Yazid. So Imam Hussain Salamullah alayhi at that point had no choice but to choose that course of action. So on the one hand, his context is such that Kufa is calling him, and they're calling him for reform. On the other hand, Yazid, the likes of him, the Muslim state had not seen. They had seen Khulafa Rashidin, in which there is first Khalifa Abu Bakr, second Khalifa Umar, third Khalifa Uthman, fourth Khalifa Imam Ali, fifth Khalifa Imam. Yes? They have seen Khulafa Rashidin. After that, there is no Khalifa Rashidin, it's Muawiyah, about which there is a huge dispute within the early Muslim community as to how did this man get in there. And then there is Yazid. Now it's a shock to the system. And Yazid is so blatantly against Islam. He is demanding the bay'ah of Hussein. Hussein can't give it because he legitimizes it. On the other hand, Kufa is calling him for reform. So his statements are to be understood in the immediate context in which he is making those statements. Yes? The Sunni analysis of the history is that Hussain Salamullah alayhi did not intend to go and engage in war. Had he done so, he would have gathered a huge army with him. But he took instead the ladies and the children. But as things transpired, he accepted his fate. Himself in Karbala, he accepted. Now here he had a decision to make. Would he now surrender and give the oath of allegiance, or would he be a dignified man and say that, look, my allegiance is wrong on 2 counts? One of his words were, what do you say? تركني من السلة والذلة وحياة من الذلة. He said, a claimant, son of a claimant, a false claimant, son of a false claimant, meaning Muawiyah and Yazid, has left me between humility or death. Yes? Sorry? وَهَيْهَاتْ مِنَ الذِّلَّةِ. Far be from us humility. But you know what he says after that? يَعْبَ اللَّهَ لَنَا ذَلِكَ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Allah does not allow that. The messenger doesn't allow that, and the people don't allow that. So it means as an imam, he was a responsible person. He knew that if he paid allegiance to Yazid, it would condone Yazid as a Khalifa who sets a standard within Islam. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, I'm sorry I'm going on a bit, Bay'ah had a special relevance back in the day. Imam Ali talks against Talha and Zubair. He said that these people gave me Bay'ah and then they broke Bay'ah. So Bay'ah meant something huge. If you give bay'ah to somebody, it means you are now not going to stand against them. You can't give bay'ah to a Khalifa and then stand against him. So that's why Imam Ali Salamullah alayhi was displeased with Talha and Zubair when they stood with Lady Aisha in Jamal. He said, this is wrong. You can't give bay'ah and then break it. So Hussein ibn Ali was now very, very mindful that if he were to give bay'ah, he would be left speechless afterwards. Not only that, it would be strengthening Yazid's model of Khalifa as an interpreter of Islam. So a lot was at stake, and Hussein ibn Ali's words have to be interpreted within his immediate socio-political context.
Thank you. Just if you could pass the mic to your right, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mohammed.
Abu Jaffar mentioned that. He mentioned regarding the killing of Imam Hussein, and he mentioned that there's some dispute within the Sunni and Shia research texts regarding whether Muawiyah was responsible or not. And he said he didn't want to cause any kind of tension and so forth. So my question is that obviously there are many scholars who have blamed Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah for the killing of Hussein, and also Uthman. Do you said that you yourself, that you weren't going to go into that controversy, but do you condemn those people who have cursed Muawiyah, Uthman and the companions and blame them for example, what happened between Ali and Muawiyah and what happened to Imam Hussein at Karbala? So do you free exonerate yourself from those statements that those people have maligned, who have cursed some of the Sahaba and blamed them for what happened, some of the battles?
I didn't get your question because
Shall I say it again?
my English is not, I can't hear. You speak maybe faster anyway. So can you ask a direct question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Directly, you mentioned that, with the killing of Imam Hussein, that you yourself weren't going to enter into the controversy of whether or not Muawiyah was responsible or not. But however, some Shia writers have blamed Muawiyah and blamed Banu Umayyah and Uthman, for what happened with regards to the war between Ali and Muawiyah, and also
Blaming or cursing?
both blaming and cursing.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you yourself, do you agree with those statements? And if you don't agree with those statements, for example, Imam Khomeini, where he speaks ill of Muawiyah and Uthman and Banu Umayyah, if you don't agree with those statements, do you free yourself from those statements?
First, I'm not a representative of Imam Khomeini or say Sistani or anyone. I'm just an independent person, and I think independently. It may be that we all we share some beliefs together, but I'm not responsible for what they are saying. Second thing, the history of Islam, whether written by Shias or Sunni, bears ample testimony that Imam Hussein was murdered in Karbala, right? And someone has to kill Hussein, otherwise he couldn't have killed himself, right? So there is a lot of riwayas. Oh, no, let us say that there is no hadith, but Quran says, "Man qatala musliman muta'ammidan, fajaza'uhu jahannam wa ghadabullahi alayhi." Anyone who killed a Muslim purposely, intentionally, his reward is where? Is Jahannam. Wa ghadabullahi alayhi. Wa ghadabullahi alayhi means the anger, the wrath of Allah is upon him. Do you agree with that? Forget about hadith and all of these things. So I say what Allah has said, that anyone who have murdered Hussein, his jaza is Jahannam, and the wrath of Allah is upon him. Do you agree with me?
I do agree, yeah.
Good, good. So if Yazid has sent the army with his governor Ibn Ziyad in Iraq to capture Hussein and bring him in Karbala, the land there, and then ask him to pay allegiance to Yazid, knowing that Hussein alayhi salam will refuse to pay allegiance to Yazid, then the battle started and they murdered the children and Imam Hussein. So can we consider those who murdered Hussein as righteous people?
My question wasn't regarding Yazid, my question was regarding Banu Umayyah and Muawiyah specifically.
As Banu Umayyah is concerned,
And you said to present to anyone.
what is your opinion if someone have murdered 35 Sahabas who participated in the Battle of Badr? What is your opinion about him?
So is that what you're saying, that they're responsible for is that what you're saying? Let's make it.
What is your opinion for someone who murdered Sahaba called Hujr bin Adi?
No, I'm saying, is that what you're saying though?
All right.
Sorry. I'll just, because I think maybe Sheikh hasn't understood. Sorry. You see, look, the Shias at times go overboard in cursing. For this, they are not justified. Okay? I'm very critical of all sides. Now, when it comes to the attitude towards the Sahaba, best practice is constituted by the Prophet and his family according to the Shia theology, Shia Muslim theology. So Imam Hussein, when this was happening, so he wrote a letter to the people of Basra, in which he stated, he said, look, we are saddened that first Khalifa Abu Bakr, second Khalifa Umar, third Khalifa Uthman preceded themselves above Ali. We feel Ali was the most righteous one. Nonetheless, we commend them to Allah for the good that they've tried to do. That was the attitude of Imam Hussein. And that is what should be a standard. That you can be objective, but that's about it. Objective and that's it. Fine. Two, if you look at the historical texts around Karbala, you will see Muslim ibn Aqil or another one of the martyrs of Kufa, when Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad said, what is your view of Uthman? He said, don't ask me about Uthman, ask me about you and your father, about Yazid and his father Muawiyah, and I'll tell you what I think. And he said, no, I will not ask you about us, I'll put you to death instead. So, now here is the bottom line, that as far as the Khulafa Rashidin are concerned, there is unanimity that following the best practice of the Prophet and the Imams, we commend them to Allah for the good that they did. As far as Muawiyah is concerned, as far as the wives of the Prophet are concerned, they are the wives of the Prophet. They need to be given utmost respect, because the one against whom Lady Aisha engaged, he himself respected her. Imam Ali respected her to the extremes. And Lady Aisha after Jamal regretted Jamal. Yes, that I shouldn't have done this. It was a mistake. I should have been led into or talked into it. So we leave that to one side. Now it comes to Muawiyah. Now here we find no justification that Muawiyah merits any virtue. Historically, if you listen to a very outstanding Salafi scholar, he's in fact the only one that I listen to by and large, because he's very objective, a very good, to the core Muslim, surrender to the truth, Maulana Ishaq. who died a year and a half ago, Maulana Ishaq, yes, of Pakistan. He states, he says, look, all the fadail of Muawiyah stem from a single source within a single era. If indeed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had stated these things about Muawiyah, there would have been variety of reporters from different chains reporting it. So he says, I discredit every virtue and merit attributed to Muawiyah by the Prophet of Islam. In fact, if you look objectively, and I'm only asking myself to be objective, it does seem that Muawiyah was a cause of a lot of problems within the Muslim state. And Maulana Maududi also, obviously, Khilafah al-Mulukiyah, if we read these books, and we'll see these are the grand Sunni thinkers, which are seriously contributors to Muslim knowledge base for all of us. And we all read Maulana Maududi, how wonderfully he expresses his findings in his tafsir. Beautiful. So he himself says that Muawiyah was the first one that converted Khilafah into Mulukiyah. Yes, into monarchy. So as far as Khulafa Rashidin are concerned, Azwajul Nabi are concerned, utmost respect. Commend them to Allah for the good that they have done. And the Azwajul Nabi are Ahlul Bayt undeniably. There are two tiers, but they are Ahlul Bayt. But as far as Muawiyah is concerned, being objective, it doesn't lend much merit to him. Yes? And to be honest with you, as a Muslim, in the attitude of a Muslim, we can be objective as far as the Khulafa Rashidin are concerned as well. As far as Imam Ali is concerned, as far as Imam Hassan is concerned, we can be brutally objective and honest. And we can be objective and honest about the Messenger of Allah himself, as Allah is being brutally objective and honest about Ibrahim, Musa's journey, Sulaiman's journey, Nabi Nuh being angered and imprecating his people, Musa being incensed and pulling Harun by the hair and beard, so on and so forth. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm very wary of time. I know we're running over now. Perhaps if I take one question online and then one from yourself, and then we'll conclude there. So just a question that's come through online, which I think is directed towards perhaps Shaykh Arif and Shaykh Abu Jaffar, who made reference to this. Why aren't other scholars condemning certain practices like tatbir, which give such a bad image to Islam in general?
Tatbir, in the rightest sense, should not be performed. It's not right. Not only is it giving a bad name to Islam, it's distracting from the true message of Imam Hussein. Yes? Not only in public practice, in private practice, it should not be performed. And if Hussein ibn Ali is saying to his sister, who is the most worthy to cry over him, to lose her sanity, as Sarah slapped her face, she is the most worthy to lose her sanity, her composure. If he says to the one who is so bereaved, don't scratch your face, then please tell me, is good practice constituted in taking blades and cutting ourselves? It's not. It's not right. We can't say in the name of love and grief for Imam Hussein, we go and strike swords on our head and blades on our back and on our chest. I don't think I don't think the Prophet of Allah would condone this. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Hasan al-Hussein, none of them would condone such action.
It seems Shaykh Abu Jaffar, you're broadly in agreement with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Did you want to add any further comments?
I agree with that because it is, Shaykh, he recited the verse when we start, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. I witnessed one day someone was cutting himself at the back, and so it is not allowed such kind of act. And all of our maraja, actually great maraja of Shia, they have, prohibit such kind of, doing that.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll conclude with one final question. Just over in that corner there.
I got a question here. Just wondering, how we are told that grieving for Imam Hussein is praiseworthy, and how we have evidences for that. Like you tried to mention some evidences for that. But I was just wondering, you're grieving for Imam Hussein's death, but why do we not see this grievance from, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death? And why have we not a day for grievance for the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Is me or you?
Any of the three speakers.
Sheikh.
I'll just do a very brief answer.
Okay.
I don't think you were here in the early part of the discussions, so you've missed quite a bit out. I saw you coming in a bit later, so quite a lot of this was discussed in the earlier part of the discussion. Now, as far as the Prophet is concerned, yes, there is a day of grief for the death of the Prophet as well. Yes? There is a day of, you said, why not grieve for the Prophet? Well, there is a designated day in which the community grieves for the Prophet and the death of the Prophet. Yes? Is that okay? Now, as far as the evidence are concerned, the Quran, Shaykh Abu Jaffar did offer a lot of evidences, but as far as the Quran is concerned, its primary principle is one of ibaha. Ibaha means general permissibility. The Prophet of Allah says, say, I do not find anything haram beyond what I have already given to you. Yes? And then he commends the grief of Yaqub for Yusuf. Yes? It commends the grief of Yaqub for Yusuf. And historically we know always Qarni. We know when Jaffar fell at Mata, the Prophet said, there is nobody to cry for my Jaffar. Yes? And we know that the falling of Hamza, the Prophet cried, and then they clenched their fists and they struck their chest in honor for a fallen warrior. Yes? Now, in addition to that, Hussein ibn Ali's message was kept alive through the of grief, because it, together with it being a moral message, it was also a political movement to imbalance the Umayyad power. So it was kept alive through grief and through mourning. There are some of the reasons for why it was kept alive by the children of Imam Hussein, the subsequent Imams. Historically, those were also the reason. I'll give it back to the Shaykh.
Well, thank you very much for your question, brother. I did say in my introduction that we Muslims, we don't spend much time for research. This research will help us to know each other and to be very close to each other and bring love for each other. As for the mourning for the Holy Prophet, I invite you to go to any Shia masjid in 28th of Safar. Can you remember that? 28th of Safar, you go to any Shia masjid, then your answer will be, your question will be answered. And in the 21st of Ramadan, inshallah, go to any Shia masjid, you will get your answer there. And during the time, 28th of Safar is the death anniversary of the Holy Prophet according to Shia. He died in 28th of Safar. So the Shias mourn the Holy Prophet, the Shia mourn Bibi Fatima, the time he died, the Shia mourn Hussein, Shia mourn Hassan, Shia mourns all of their Imams actually. So it doesn't mourn only Hussein. But we mourn Imam Hussein a.s. in that way, because he is the only Imam who died and killed and murdered in that way. I think you understand this. So another is for the Sunnah of grieving. I read to you here, I didn't read this hadith. It is stated in Sunan at-Tirmidhi, volume 5, page 657. Salma narrated, I witnessed Salama radiallahu anha in a weeping state. I asked her as to what made her weep. Salama replied, I have seen the Prophet in such a state in a dream, that his head and his beard was stained with dust. I said, O a Prophet of God, what made you like this? He replied, I witnessed the killing of Hussein. A similar dream was also witnessed by Ibn Abbas, as recorded in Al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain of Imam al-Hakim, volume 4, page 439. Ammar said that Ibn Abbas said, one afternoon I dreamt of Holy Prophet, standing with his hair disturbed and with dust tangled in them, and he was holding a phial filled with blood. I say to the Prophet, O Allah Prophet, what are you holding? The Prophet replied, this is the blood of Hussein and his companions that I have been collecting all the day long. They did calculation and found that Imam Hussein was killed a day before that dream. Remember the Holy Prophet, he said, if you dream him, you really saw him in reality, because the shaitan cannot impersonate his personality. So this is how the state of the Holy Prophet, he was mourning for Hussein. He was informing people. He was texting them actually, in the language of today, that look, Hussein has been murdered, and his hair was full of dust, his head was full of dust, and here was full of dust. This type of, so mourning of Hussein is not for Shias, Hussein for Muslims, Hussein for Islam. This is what we are telling all the Ummah for 14 centuries. You shouldn't give us Hussein or Hussein is not ours. It doesn't belong to us alone. It belongs to everyone. I think, yeah, this is, yeah.
Thank you very much. Perhaps just a quick notice, there's a silver Honda Jazz 53 plate blocking one of our guests. If you are that car owner, if you could move your car, that would be much appreciated. Perhaps we need to conclude now, so may I invite our scholars to make some concluding remarks up to a maximum of a minute each, and then we'll conclude. Perhaps begin with Shaykh Arif.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As Muslims, as people who will stand in line as messenger, as people who need to make something out of their lives here in this world, we need to be God-focused, we need to be God-centric. We cannot be stuck to the belief systems in which we were born, or the indoctrinations through which we have been indoctrinated through religion and culture. We need to be Muslim in the sense of surrendering to God in terms of being very objective, trying to understand the facts of history, trying to see that the blessed example of the Prophet was one of bringing about goodness and growth within the human community through bringing them to God and making them godly and acquisition of good morals. If that is the spirit, and then if we look at Hussein ibn Ali, then Hussein becomes extremely meaningful and empowers us and adds to our journey towards God and self-realization. We need to put aside our persuasions, inclinations, biases, and be brutally honest to ourselves. Whatever is added to the story of Hussein, we need to say this has been added. Whatever has gone wrong with the story of Hussein, we need to say this has gone wrong with the story of Hussein. Whatever is the essence of the story of Hussein, we need to declare that this is the essence. Now, my concluding remark is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Isa before him, like Musa, like Ibrahim, all of these blessed prophets came to mankind. They promoted goodness within mankind. They took whatever mankind had, turned it towards goodness. They were not a point of division, they were a point of unity. Hussein ibn Ali similarly needs to be seen in the same way. Hussein never claimed himself to be a Shia or a Sunni. In fact, the people with Hussein are sometimes not even Muslims, they're Christians. Yes? He's not concerned about Shia and Sunni, as his father wasn't concerned about who was praying like this with him and who was praying with his hands open. In the Battle of Siffin, people were praying like this with him. He's fine with it, yes? So Hussein ibn Ali has to be a point of convergence of humanity on commonly shared value, and for Muslims on the point of God centricity and godliness.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Ali Rasa.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The verse of the Quran says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا عَلَى النَّاسِ شُهَدَاءَ. The verse of the Quran says that we have placed you a median or a moderate ummah, so that you may be a witness for the sake of humankind. So the very notion of ummah, according to the Quran, is not one which is to separate us from the rest of humankind. The very notion of the idealized notion of ummah in the Quran is one which is for the sake of humankind, which is a means for universal betterment. Hussein ibn Ali stated that his purpose was to reform his grandfather's ummah. So we should recognize the purpose of an ideal Muslim is one who is a positive force for humanity at large. The remembrance of Hussein ibn Ali is potentially one of the most beautiful methods of attaining that expression of Allah's intention. But as soon as it isn't a means to universal betterment, we must reconsider its practice. We must reconsider how this message can be used for the sake of the values for which Hussein ibn Ali stood for and was brutally killed for. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you, Shaykh Abu Jaffar.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Imam Hussein, he had a very important message which the two Shaykh have already mentioned. He said, Inni wallahi inni ma kharajtu ashiran wala bataran innama kharajtu li talab al-islah fa ummat jaddi. By Allah, I did not come out as an arrogant or evil seeker. I have come seeking for the reform of the ummah of my grandfather. One of the reform that Imam Hussein alayhi salam wanted to bring it is to bring the whole Muslim to the book of Allah. During the time of Imam Hussein, you will wonder that the book of Allah was already forgotten. If you remember, before Imam Hussein was killed, the governor of Kufa was someone called Walid bin Uqba. He prayed namaz al-subuh 4 rakats because he was a drunk, and then he turned into the people who are praying behind. He said, the reform can I increase more rakat? You want more rakat? Bring it is to bring the whole Muslim to the book of Allah. During the time of you will wonder people have already forgotten prayers, they don't know, already forgotten. If you remember before Muharram, is a governor himself for someone called he's leading the mosque and he is drunk 4 rakats and he is vomiting in the masjid, and then he was called to Medina. People who are very Khalif, Osman, Affan, and you want more because of this incident. So Imam, he said, I can't bring reform. There was a number of reform that Imam was doing. Like, remove those types of people. If you can go to the masjid, he's an Imam, and he's praying for Ramadan. And you know what he's saying is drunk. So this is the thing that Imam Hussein is supposed to remain important in our minds. But this is what I was mentioning. To see my grandfather get to me, he says, son, Imam, he says, they have honey. So this is a thing directly message to my Shia brothers and sisters. You have honey. This is why you are touched. Preserve your honey. Don't mix your honey with innovations and things which is not good. If you mix your honey with innovation and they will reject your message. They will reject the message of Ali that you have. They will the message of the Prophet that you have, the message of Ali that you have, the message of Hassan that you have, the message of Hussein that you have, the message of 12 Imam that you have. They will reject it. They don't care. Because we have mixed the honey with something bitter. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Just before I make some concluding remarks, there are 2 research seminars which I've been asked to bring to your attention. The first is on the 5th of November 2015 by Dr. Farhana Mayer from the Institute of the AMI Studies on the topic Exegesis, Ontological Hierarchy and Spiritual Alchemy, the hermeneutical matrix of the Jaffari comments in Sulami's Haqa'iq al-Tafsir. And secondly, a research seminar on the 17th of December 2015 by Dr. Chris Allen from the University of Birmingham. The topic being the understanding of Islamophobia in today's Britain, manifestations and responses. Both of these research seminars will take place on Thursdays at 3 p.m. at the Al-Mahdi Institute. And for further information, if you could see the Al-Mahdi website, almahdi.edu. So perhaps just to make some concluding remarks, I think there's been some fascinating discourse, some most enlightening and thought-provoking discussions, and I'm sure these discussions will continue over refreshments which will be available outside on your way out. May Allah bless our efforts in furthering our understanding of the tragedy of Karbala and the practices of the remembrance of this event. And let us evolve together in achieving godliness and goodliness. Please join me in blessing our Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt with one salawat. Allah Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Outside. The refreshments are outside on your way.